Early stages of the conspiracy. In spite of the preparations he had made for a coup d'etat, Catiline was a candidate for the consulship of the following year, hoping if elected to find it easy to use Antonius for his own purposes. Meanwhile, he was not idle, but kept on laying all manner of traps for Cicero. The latter did not lack craft or cunning to defend himself. At the very beginning of his consulship, he had made many promises, through the agency of Fulvia, to the Quintus Curius mentioned above, and had thereby induced him to betray Catiline's designs. Furthermore, by agreeing to let his colleague Antonius have the governorship of a rich province, he had prevailed on him to remain loyal, and for his own protection, he had secretly organized a bodyguard of friends and retainers. When the polling day came and Catiline found that both his candidature and an attempt which he made against the consuls in the Campus Martius had failed, he decided to try extreme measures. Open war was now his only resource, since his secret endeavors had ended in defeat and disgrace. He therefore sent Gaius Manlius to the neighborhood of Faesulae and Etruria, a certain Septimius, a citizen of Camerino, to Picenum, Gaius Julius to Apulia, and others to various districts where he thought they would be useful. Meanwhile, at Rome, he had several plans on foot simultaneously, plotting by stealth against the lives of the consuls, organizing acts of arson, and occupying strategic points with armed men. He himself went about armed, and bade his followers do the same, urging them to be continually alert and ready. Day and night he was wide awake and hurrying to and fro, his strength unexhausted by want of sleep or toil. Finally, when all this feverish activity effected nothing, he deputed Marcus Porcius Laetia to summon another meeting of the ringleaders at dead of night. There, after bitterly complaining of their lack of energy, he informed them that he had sent Manlius on ahead to the fighting force which had been assembled, and others also, to begin hostilities at various key points. He himself, he added, was eager to join his army, if only he could first destroy Cicero, who was a serious hindrance to his plans. Fear made the rest hesitate, but Gaius Cornelius, a Roman equus, offered his services and was joined by a senator named Lucius Sergius. They decided to go to Cicero's house later that night with a band of armed men and to gain admittance by pretending to make a ceremonial morning call. They would then take him by surprise and assassinate him in his own house before he could defend himself. But Curius, realizing that the consul was in mortal peril, hastened to warn him, through Fulvia, of the trap which is being set for him. Accordingly, the door was shut against them, and they found that they had accomplished nothing by undertaking to commit this atrocious crime. Meanwhile, in Etruria, Manlius was agitating among a populace whose poverty, added to the resentment which they felt at their wrongs, made them eager for revolution. For during Sulla's tyranny, they had lost their lands and all the rest of their possessions. He also approached some of the many types of brigands who infested that part of the country, as well as some veteran soldiers from Sulla's colonies, whose lavish indulgence of their appetites had exhausted the enormous booty they had brought home. The news of these events greatly disturbed Cicero, who saw himself beset with difficulties on both sides. The city could no longer be protected from the conspirators by unofficial action on his part, and as to Manlius's army, he had no exact knowledge either of its size or of its commander's intentions. He therefore apprised the Senate of the matter, which had already been a topic of popular gossip. In accordance with its usual practice in serious emergencies, the Senate decreed that the consuls should take measures for the defense of the realm, thus conferring upon them the most extensive powers that Roman custom allows it to entrust to magistrates. This decree authorizes them to levy troops and conduct war, to apply unlimited force to allies and citizens alike, and to exercise supreme command and jurisdiction, both at home and abroad. Without it, a resolution of the popular assembly is necessary to confer any of these powers upon a consul. A few days later, a senator called Lucius Sergius read to the House a letter which he said had come to him from Faesulae, stating that Gaius Manlius had taken the field with a large army on the 27th of October. There were also the usual conflicting rumors. Some reported portents and omens, others had heard that men were being assembled and arms transported here or there, and that at Capua and in Apulia the slaves were rising. Accordingly, by decree of the Senate, Quintus Marcius Rex was sent to Faesulae and Quintus Metellus Creticus to the neighborhood of Apulia. Both these officers were waiting at the gates of Rome, retaining their commands in the hope of a triumph, of which they were cheated by the quibbling objections of a small clique who made a practice of selling anything, honorable or dishonorable, for a consideration. Of the praetors, Quintus Pompeius Rufus was sent to Capua, and Quintus Metellus Celer to Picenum, with instructions to raise forces adequate to deal with the critical situation that had arisen. Rewards were also offered for information about the plot against the state. For a slave, the reward was to be his freedom and 100,000 sesterces. For a free man, double that sum, and a pardon for any share he might have had in the conspiracy. Furthermore, the gladiatorial schools were to be broken up and the gladiators sent away to Capua and other towns in numbers proportioned to the resources of each place. And throughout Rome, night watches were to be posted by the junior magistrates. These events had made a profound impression on the people and had changed the face of the city. In place of the reckless gaiety and pleasure-seeking which a long period of tranquility had fostered, there was sudden and universal gloom. Everyone was in a state of feverish anxiety. No one thought any place safe or trusted anyone. There was neither open war nor real peace, and each man estimated the danger by the measure of his own dread. The women, too, to whom at the center of such a great empire fear of war came as a new experience, beat their breasts, stretched out hands in supplication to heaven, and bewailed the fate of their little children. Questions were continually upon their lips and terror in their hearts. Pride and frivolity were forgotten in the despair with which they anticipated their own and their country's fate. Catiline's ruthless spirit still pursued its fell design, undeterred by the preparations for defense, or by a prosecution which Lucius Paulus brought against him under the law of Plautius. Finally, either as part of his plan of dissimulation, or with the idea of establishing his innocence if any speaker should denounce him, he attended a meeting of the Senate. Thereupon, the consul Cicero, alarmed by Catiline's presence, or it may be, moved by indignation, rendered the state good service by delivering a brilliant oration, which he afterwards wrote down and published. When Cicero sat down, Catiline began to act his part of complete innocence. With downcast eyes, he implored the senators in suppliant tones not to be too hasty in believing anything that was alleged against him. His high birth, he said, and the life he had lived ever since his youth justified him in entertaining the highest hopes. He was born a patrician, and like his ancestors before him, he had many times been of service to the Roman people. Could it be seriously supposed that such a man stood to gain anything by the ruin of the Republic, when a mere immigrant like Cicero sought to preserve it? He was proceeding to hurl further insults when the whole house shouted him down, with cries of "enemy" and "traitor." At this he flew into a towering rage. "Since I am encompassed by foes," he cried, "and hounded to desperation, I will check the fire that threatens to consume me by pulling everything down about your ears." With these words he dashed out of the Senate house and hurried home, where he pondered deeply on the situation. His murderous plots against the consul were making no headway, and no attempt at arson would be foiled by the patrols. So he thought the best thing to do was to reinforce his army and to employ the time which must elapse before legions could be enrolled in providing everything needful for war. At dead of night, therefore, he set out for Manlius's camp with a few companions, leaving orders for Sergius, Lentulus, and the most daring and determined of his other accomplices to do everything possible to increase the strength of their party, to find an early opportunity of assassinating Cicero, and to make arrangements for massacre, fire-raising, and other violent outrages. He himself, he added, would shortly be marching on the city with a large army. While these events were taking place at Rome, Gaius Manlius sent a deputation of his followers to Marcius Rex with a message to this effect: "We call gods and men to witness, sir, that our object in taking up arms was not to attack our country or to endanger others, but to protect ourselves from wrong. We are poor, needy wretches. The cruel harshness of moneylenders has robbed most of us of our homes, and all of us have lost reputation and fortune. Not one was allowed the benefit of the law, established by our ancestors, which should have enabled us, by sacrificing our possessions, to save our persons from bondage. Such was the inhumanity of the moneylenders and the praetor. On many occasions your forefathers took pity on the common people of Rome and issued decrees to relieve their distress. Quite recently, within our own memory, the total of outstanding debts was so huge that all good citizens concurred in permitting them to be discharged in copper instead of silver. Often, too, the commons themselves, either desirous of political power or exasperated by the arrogance of magistrates, took up arms and seceded from the patricians. We, however, are not seeking dominion or riches, the invariable causes of war and quarreling among human beings, but only freedom, which no true man ever surrenders while he lives. We beseech you and the Senate to rescue your unhappy fellow citizens, to restore to us the legal protection snatched from us by the praetor's injustice, and not force us to seek a means of selling our life's blood as dearly as we can." Marcius' reply to this appeal was that if they wished to make any request to the Senate, they must lay down their arms and humbly present their petition at Rome. The Roman Senate, he said, had always shown such clemency and compassion that no one ever asked its help in vain. Catiline, who in the meantime was on his way to join Manlius, wrote to many men of consular rank and other members of the aristocracy, saying that since he had not been able to withstand the group of enemies who persecuted him with trumped-up charges, he was resigning himself to his lot and going to Marseilles as an exile. not because his conscience reproached him with the heinous crime of which he was accused, but in order to preserve the peace of the state and avoid stirring up civil strife by struggling against his fate. A very different letter was read to the Senate by Quintus Catulus, who said it had been delivered to him as from Catiline. The following is a copy of it. Lucius Catiline to Quintus Catulus. Your very loyal friendship, of which you have given practical proof, and which I value much in the great dangers that confront me, gives me confidence in appealing to your kindness. I do not intend, therefore, to make any formal defense of my new policy. I will, however, explain my point of view. What I am going to say implies no consciousness of guilt, and on my word of honor, you can accept it as the truth. I was provoked by wrongs and insults, and robbed of the fruits of my painstaking industry, and I found myself unable to maintain a position of dignity. So I openly undertook the championship of the oppressed, as I had often done before. It was not that I could not have paid my personal debts by selling some of my estates, and as for the loans raised on the security of others, the generosity of Orestilla would have discharged them with her own resources and those of her daughter. It was because I saw unworthy men promoted to honorable positions and felt myself treated as an outcast on account of unjust suspicions. That is why I have adopted a course of action, amply justified in my present circumstances, which offers a hope of saving what is left of my honor. I intended to write at greater length, but news has come that they are preparing to use force against me. So for the present, I commend Orestilla to you and entrust her to your protection. Shield her from wrong, I beg you, in the name of your own children. Farewell. Catiline spent a few days with Gaius Flaminius near Arezzo, supplying arms to the local people, whom he had previously incited to revolt. He then assumed the fasces and other insignia of military command and marched toward Manlius's camp. When this was known at Rome, the Senate declared Catiline and Manlius public enemies, but offered a pardon to the remainder of the rebel forces, except those who stood condemned on capital charges, if they would lay down their arms before a specified date. It was further decreed that the consuls should enroll troops, and that Antonius should hasten with an army in pursuit of Catiline, while Cicero guarded the city.